Welcome to this Galien Foundation Week of Biomedical Innovation webinar, celebrating the best of the best in life sciences innovation that improves the human condition. I'm Bhargav Mantha. I'm a partner at CS and I lead up the firm's MedTech practice. And I'll be serving as chair and moderator of this 1 hour discussion highlighting nominees in the best medical technology product category of the annual Galien USA Awards program. The webinars taking place this week serve as essential background for the awards, the Galien Foundation's largest event, held on Thursday evening at the American Museum of Natural History in New York. It takes place in conjunction with our annual Galien USA Forum, which hosts speakers representing top scientific experts, biopharma and medtech business executives and entrepreneurs and leaders in public health. Because the mission of the Galien community is to improve the human condition, we have developed this webinar series to give our nominees greater visibility in describing the highs and the lows of their long journey to a breakthrough medical discovery. In the best medical technology category, which is our focus today, we have panelists representing companies that work tirelessly in bringing their technologies forward for recognition by our Galien USA Awards Committee of Nobel laureates and other distinguished leaders in science and industry. I'd now like to welcome each of our panelists to the webinar. Can I ask each of you to introduce yourself, your company and title, as well as a few words describing your association with the nominated product? Ishu, let's start with you. I guess we lost Ishu. John, you want to get started then?
I see Ishu is back if you want to.
Hey, I apologize for that. I had some technical difficulties, but I am back. Yeah, thanks for including me and Impulse Dynamics in this panel. We've been here before, and it's always kind of a fun thing to do and a highlight, certainly of my year. So I believe you were asking about the unmet need. Is that right, Bart?
No, just an introduction at this point, Ishu.
My bad. Yeah, so sorry, Ishu Ram, the medical director and senior vice president of medical affairs for Impulse Dynamics. I was a practicing electrophysiologist for, we'll round up to almost 2 decades. Had a great clinical career and joined Impulse about 5.5 years ago. At the point that I joined, we had just received FDA approval for our product. At the point I joined also, a week later, the world shut down because of COVID. So we had a couple of challenges facing us as we were launching. But our company makes a product that treats heart failure, and be happy to talk about it more as we go.
Great. Thank you, Ishu. Welcome. John?
Hi, everyone. My name is John Anastasiadis. I am the Senior Director of Human Factors and Design at a 170-year-old medical device company called Smith & Nephew. It's a British company, but we have a lot of our operations throughout the world, in the United States in particular. And the areas in which my team focuses on and the responsibilities that we have is obviously human factors, which many of you may be familiar with within the medical device field and industry. But we also have industrial design and user interface design and user experience under our team. And so we service all of the 3 major business units across Smith & Nephew. For those who are not familiar with Smith & Nephew, we have a wound management business. We have our sports medicine and our orthopedics business. And today, the product that's being highlighted at the Prix Galien is the Cori robotic surgical system. And I'll be speaking to that a little bit later today.
Great. Welcome, John. And for the audience, if you'd like to ask a question to our panel, please do so within the QA function on the Zoom platform. So let's get started, Ishu and John. The first theme that we would like to focus on is the why, which is why did your company choose this focus and what unmet need drove your innovation? So Ishu, let's start with you. Impulse Dynamics has focused on addressing chronic heart failure, an area with tremendous unmet need. So, what inspired your team to pursue this particular approach, and what gap were you determined to close?
So this is a great question, and our history, actually, I told you we got FDA approval for our product about 5-6 years ago, but our history goes back to the late 90s. And our founder was a gentleman named Professor Shlomo Ben-Haim. He's a cardiologist by training, actually an electrophysiologist. And he is one of these people that sees something and has to ask the questions and will go down the rabbit hole and keep looking and looking. And he found some very interesting findings when he was working on patients, actually doing arrhythmia ablations in the electrophysiology lab about contractility, how the heart contracts and how it squeezes. He followed that sort of that trail of breadcrumbs, if you will, to whatever logical conclusion it took him, and it took him to the finding that if you deliver a high amount of electricity during the relaxation phase of the cardiac cycle, you can make the heart squeeze better, even the failing heart. He showed this in bench testing and preclinical animal models and so on and so on, multiple clinical trials, and then brought it to market. And really, I think that the passion that drove him is the passion that drives a lot of cardiologists, and is that you want to make patients feel better from their heart disease, and heart failure is a massive, massive problem, right? 64 million people in the world have heart failure, almost 8 million in this country. And over the course of the last, call it 4 or 5 decades, we've come up with great therapies. The implantable cardioverter defibrillator was invented to save people from cardiac arrest, which is, amazing. And there's been a host of medications, great medications that went through massive trials and showed benefit. And now there's sort of 4 foundational classes of medications that we prescribe heart failure patients to help them live longer, keep them out of the hospital. But one of the things that goes, the theme that runs through all of this, regardless of whether the defibrillator can save your life, whether these medications can keep you out of the hospital, is that they actually don't make patients feel better. So you've got patients that can now live longer, but not live better. And that was the thing that drove Professor Ben-Haim, then drove our company, was to help patients feel better, live a better life, a fuller life. And that's the why. And for our company, the why is actually very easy. There's a huge unmet need. We've had all these great advances both in med tech and in pharmaceuticals, yet patients remain symptomatic. They can't walk across their living room, much less go to their grandkids, sports competitions, or walk their dog, or even grocery shop. And giving them those things back really is an impactful thing to do for society, and selfishly for all of us. We love when we hear the patients tell us the stories. Actually, we start every monthly employee call with a patient, and a patient tells us their story. And it is remarkable, because no matter how many times you hear it and how many ways they say it, it is really, really impactful. So that's our why.
Great. Well, thank you so much for sharing, Ishu. I mean, yeah, innovation is all about being patient-centric. John, let's move over to you. Smith & Nephew, as you said, has a long legacy of advancing surgical and wound care technologies. How did your team determine this indication was right for innovation, and what patient insights guided that choice?
Yeah, so for those who are familiar with the orthopedic joint repair, joint replacement procedures, they're procedures that have been moving more and more into outpatient settings and ambulatory surgical centers, ASCs. They're procedures that require a lot of instrumentation. You have quite a few trays. I can't remember, depending on which knee and product and company you work with, but you could have, these big orthopedic trays with many
Mm-hmm.
instruments that require sterilization and remember how to use them, and it's a manual process. And so we're not all we're obviously we're serving the patient, and bringing consistency with our robotically assisted orthopedic surgical platform. We're bringing consistency to the procedures because you have some surgeons and doctors who might do a couple knees a day, and you might have that do a couple knees a year or a month. And so, being that you have this wide range of care providers, surgeons, and doctors who are providing this on a breadth of spectrum of locations from the hospital to the AFC to the ASC. You have folks that are high volume knee replacement, joint replacement individuals, and then you have low volume. And that's the patient side, bringing consistency and making sure you can try to drive that personalized, that very personalized outcome, which I can speak to some of the technologies that allow us to do that. We also are servicing the hospital and the user side of things. So the nurses and the physicians, the surgeons who are involved in that. So you're you're reducing the burden of having to use all of a vast number of instrumentation. You're improving or reducing the mental cognitive load associated with doing a manual procedure. The effort is a lot easier, if you can say that, in robotic assisted procedures. And so we are addressing two sides of that equation too. So we're making the lives of the surgeons and the orthopedic surgeons and nurses and so forth easier, more predictable, and then we're also giving our patients the best care possible, because that reduced variability is really important, and to be able to plan something ahead of time before you actually do any kind of procedure. That's a great benefit to both the patient and the physicians who are using this system to replace either your hips and knees and so forth.
Oh, great. Thank you for sharing, John. I think it's a great example of how an innovation is not just patient-centric, but clinician-centric as well. So both of you found direction by listening closely to patients, clinicians, and science. And that alignment between purpose and need drives meaningful innovation. So thank you for sharing. Let's move to the impact part, which is what measurable impact has your innovation had on patients, clinicians, or systems? So, Ishu, let's start with you again. So, Impulse Dynamics device directly impacts patient quality of life and heart failure. What data or real world outcomes best illustrate that impact, and how are you communicating that value to clinicians and payers?
So that actually in that one somewhat short sentence there's a lot to unpack, right? So the data that we showed up with to the FDA, which got us actually a 12-0 vote in our favor at panel in December of 2019, centered around quality of life. 80% of patients improved at least one New York Heart Association class. So there's 4 classes, 4 is worst, 1 is best. And improving from class 3, which is, like class 3 is where you get short of breath walking across the living room, right? And half of our patients that improved 2 classes. So they went all the way to class 1. Class 1 patients can go on a hike. Think about not being able to walk across your living room without getting short of breath, and now you're out with your family going on a hike, right? So that was the data that got us launched and going. Now, what we're seeing in real world environments and real world publications, we just presented, Dan Burkhoff from Columbia just presented at the Heart Failure Society of America a 43% reduction in death, heart failure hospitalization, need for a left ventricular assist device or transplant in patients receiving CCM therapy from a real world database. So real world databases are really, I think, becoming a lot more accepted and really validated, especially with the ability that we have to really parse data, create synthetic controls and things like this. So the data that kind of got us going was really quality of life data, but now we're starting to see more data on outcomes like survival, like heart failure hospitalization in real world situations. So that's been very impactful. If you want to know what gets so there's the data that gets you approval, there's the data that gets you adoption, and then there's the data that gets you paid, right? I mean, and those three are not as congruent as you would like them to be. But adoption, that was, so we, as I said, we got FDA approval in December of 2019. And then I joined the company March 1st of 2020. And then March 13th, we have COVID around the world and the world shuts down, right? So we're launching a novel technology with a small company into a global pandemic. So obviously there's challenges there. But as physicians got comfortable with our data, got comfortable with our technology, and then really after they saw it for themselves, right? And as I said in our clinical trials, 80% of patients improved. Well, our experience is if I tell a doc, hey, try it on 5 patients, and I bet you 4 will improve, that pans out pretty much every day of the week. So the patient's response, the clinical response that they have, is really what drives adoption. And we're a relatively small company, so we have to have good outcomes, and we do, and that is really what's driving our growth. To the point that we are on the path, we're part of the TSET program, and we are one of the 4 companies that is part of that. And as soon as the government opens up, we expect that our national coverage determination will get launched. And obviously, that's not going to come lightly from the government unless you've got data and they have some belief in it. That goes towards the payers part as well, though, right? I mean, the payers have to believe in it, and obviously the first thing they'll do is be skeptical. And to be frank with you, any good scientist should be skeptical at first, but also to be a good scientist or a good anything, you have to be willing to have your mind changed, and the data has supported that. To the point that in the public comment period of the NCD, during the national coverage analysis part, Blue Cross of Michigan actually wrote in support of our CED for the NCA. So it's all very good. So I think that we're making progress, and it is again centered around the patient, the impact on the patient, and the response that they're seeing to the therapy. I'll say one other thing in response to piggyback on what John said. I mean, I was a practicing electrophysiologist for almost 2 decades, and I recognize what he said about, you want to make procedures replicatable. You have to make them predictable for a wide variety of sort of practitioners and different settings. And I think that's one of the things that has been beneficial for us, is that our procedure is very much like implanting a dual chamber pacemaker. So it's really a bolt-on procedure for people, for institutions and practitioners that already have that skill set. So I think that is one of the things. To get adopted, you have to be accessible.
Yeah, that's very well put, issue, which is reimbursement follows approval, and adoption, it's almost a lagging indicator, but it's really about the patient and how you create that impact and how you create those stories that will drive category leadership. Yeah, thank you for sharing. John, I know you mentioned this move to different care settings, and Smith & Nephew's technology obviously reach hospitals and surgeons globally. So how do you define and measure impact when scaling medical technologies that touch diverse care settings, the way you described?
Yeah, I think the scaling aspect is through, I would say, our technology, that we try to make it as small and as accessible as possible. Our system is a very, I would say, more flexible than some of the other systems that are on the market. It allows us to create an ecosystem, so you can add on to it to I guess meet the needs of your practice or your facility. I mean, we do. I'm in R&D, so I have to be careful of what comes out of my mouth in terms of what we're working on, but at least for what's out there right now, we're looking, we have knee and hip solutions. And so you can go with one platform to satisfy many needs. Let's just put it that way. Um, and in terms of patient impact, we'll go, I'm going to continue with this theme of the patient impact and of the clinician side of the equation. From a patient's perspective, fewer patients are needing soft tissue releases when doing joint repair or joint replacement. We have a digital tensioner, robotic tensioner that makes sure that we do soft tissue balancing very precisely. Because if you can imagine now you have your knee and you're actually cutting the bone away, oftentimes there's soft tissue being affected by the procedure itself. And so can you imagine if you don't get back to the way that you were before, you're going to walk different for the rest of your life. So it's really important that you precisely execute that procedure specific to that patient. And so the system allows for that. Well, we call that improved natural joint feeling. You want ideally, at the end of the day, at the end of the procedure, you want to walk out of there not realizing that you have an artificial knee or joint. And then obviously that goes into the PROMs, the patient reported outcomes, reported afterwards. So that kind of supports the data and the claims that we have. You can go to our website and pull out all the papers. I'm not going to get into the specific numbers, but they're all there online. Also shorter length of stay. It's amazing how quickly these procedures can be done now. Before that, before these were things that you would spend at least one night in the hospital, and now you go in the morning and you're walking out maybe with some crutches or a cane later on in the day, which is absolutely amazing. But then also from the impacts that we've been able to achieve from the clinical side and the HCPs too. Orthopedic surgeons tend to have some of the highest rates of, I guess, discomfort that leads to injuries that may prevent them from practicing and continuing to practice. There's that saying that orthopedic surgeons are the carpenters and the neurologists are the electricians and the plumbers are the cardiovascular folks. So it's a quite tiresome, laborious, I guess, profession of the orthopedics to get in there and cut bone and hammer away at things and so there is quite a bit of fatigue and injury in these types of orthopedic procedures that a robotic system will actually help alleviate. And so we have some statistics here on the physical demands being less than the manual procedures. The effort and the mental, again, I'm the human factors guy, so the mental capacity of being able to perform these procedures and to have the confidence to make sure you're doing the right thing. One of the amazing things that we have in our system, in our ecosystem, in our preoperative planning software, is this thing called activities of daily living. And so we have a system that allows you, depending on what's important to the patient and what they want to get back to in their activities of daily living, it actually tailors the system, specifically the implant positioning and so forth, accurately to address those activities of daily living. So, for example, if you love the golf, and it's really important to you that you get that kinematic motion of swinging a golf club accurately. We select the golf setting, and it helps to make sure that when you do cut the bone accurately, it'll put that in the spot that'll help you make sure that you don't have any impingement in those ranges of motion that are important to you for golfing. We've got things like if you're a female and you need to put on a certain type of like a brawl or something, and your arms need to do some sort of motion, we have that too. And if you like playing tennis and so forth, or you just need to bend over and pick up things, we can just make sure that's perfect for your lifestyle.
Great. Thank you for sharing, John. A few takeaways from what you described. One is impact is not just about outcomes, it's also about experiences, providing the right experiences to your patients and your clinicians, improving the longevity of your clinician customer, making sure that you are embedding the solution into the day-to-day life of your patient, You're not just creating a product, you're creating an ecosystem and a solution. So thank you for sharing, Ishu and John. So what I noticed is that, as I said, impact isn't about just outcomes or data, it's about transformation. It's about the workflows and it's about the patient experiences. Obviously, when we look at the outcome, we only look at the outcome and say that, hey, it's probably been very easy, but that's not the case. So let's talk a little bit about the journey as innovators and entrepreneurs such as you have taken, and how that has shaped your own perception about how to innovate. So maybe, Ishu, let's start with you. From a regulatory and a clinical trial perspective, what were some of the biggest challenges that Impulse Dynamics faced in moving from concept to approval? And what lessons would you share about balancing innovation with evidence generation?
It's another great question. That we have, as I said, a 25 plus year history, and the lessons are many for us. I'll give you some sort of small ones, I guess, and then there's one big one. One of the smallish ones is that we still are a privately held company. We've got, bigger investors now, but when we started out, it was Professor Benheim funding it with, some other investors. But really, every dime is worth $1 to you at that point, because, you don't really have anything to waste. And you don't have redundancy or anything like that. So when you are designing your clinical trials, you're trying to make sure that you're maximizing what you're going to get out of it, meaning what's the outcome you're going to get, and what is that outcome going to translate to those, kind of things we talked about, for registration, meaning, approval, for adoption, and then for payers. And the easy thing to do is often to say, oh, go for the big one, go for everything. It's not realistic. You have a small company with a finite amount of money, so you're trying to figure out, what's the best way to do it. So that's one, is that you plan very carefully. The second one that's very real in cardiology and very real in heart failure is the playing surface is very dynamic. And what I mean by that is that when we started, CRT therapy, which is now a cornerstone device therapy for treatment of heart failure, really was just nascent. So we're starting our clinical trial and CRT just got approved. We have no idea how CRT is going to fare in the medium to long term. How do we position ourselves? Do we include those patients in our trials or not? Those kind of things. Drug therapy. When 25 years ago when this company was founded, people said don't give beta blockers to heart failure patients. Now it's the first thing you give them. So I mean, the world changes around you. So you're like, okay, now my patients were on 3 drug therapy when we did the trial, but oh, guess what? Nowadays they need to be on 4 drug therapy. So you do a trial, and then by the time you do the follow-up and the submission, the PMA, you're bordering on being outmoded, so you're dynamic. You've got to be as dynamic as the playing surface in moving your trial and making amendments and things like this. So those are kind of the things that I think that is that what I think the lesson there is that nothing is static. Every day, every week, every month, you're evaluating where you are, iterating as you need to go. I think the other thing, and this is a big lesson, a little bit more philosophical, is that when you start, you play to win. And what I mean by that is that when you're starting out and you're like, hey, I'm going to do a clinical trial on this, you need to assume that that's going to be positive and you're going to get down the road to approval, which is frankly the easiest of the 3 hurdles. Then you have to get it adopted, and then you have to get it paid for. And the payer hurdle is the highest one. So when you're designing your stuff on the front end, play to win, meaning that you think you're going to win, you're going to get the approval. How is that going to play with the payers? Or did you design a trial that'll just get you FDA approval, but it's not good enough to get the therapy to patients they won't get paid for? So I think those are kind of the lessons that we as a company learned along the way. We, I will say, are, I think, very, very good at iterating as we go. We've realized that you can't have sort of decade-long trials, or the trial you designed is not relevant to the landscape you live in now. So those kind of things. But yeah, I think those are the lessons. If anyone's starting out, I would say that's what you gotta plan for.
No, yeah, very insightful, Rishi, very insightful. So one is, of course, how do you stay nimble and agile? And then how do you continually prepare yourself for the hardest step in the journey, right? You have to have that mindset that you're here to play to win, and you have to proportionately gauge the level of difficulty for each step in the journey. Yeah, very well said. John, Smith and Nephew obviously operates in a highly competitive and regulated environment. So, what hurdles did you face in gaining adoption or navigating the approval process, and how did your team sustain momentum through it?
Yeah, I think the hard part for let's just stick with robotics here and robotic assisted orthopedic surgery. I think the hard part is that even though robotic surgery, especially with the intuitive system, whatnot, being on the market for a while, there we seem to still be having these conversations around what are the benefits of robotic surgery.
Mm.
And there's still the old guard, if you will, that is holding on to that manual the way it's been done for a while. But the surgeons nowadays, the ones that are coming online now or have come online and not too long ago, it grew up playing video games. And
Mm.
and if you think about an analogy I like to use is there were people at IBM back in the 70s, very smart people, really, successful individuals saying, why would anybody want a computer in their home?
Mm.
Well, that was a miss, right? And so to me, some of the challenges still that we face and as the system gains adoption and has been gaining adoption is just coming to terms with some of the folks that still feel or wondering what the value of of digital, I like to call it digital surgery is.
Mhm.
One of the luxuries of being, I think, in the medtech space is that because of all of the regulatory requirements and technical hurdles, uh, we tend to lag the consumer space by a number
Mhm.
of years, and you have the luxury of seeing where the puck is gone or going, um, from the analogous industries such as the consumer space and whatnot, where it's easy for those of us in R&D to be able to say, well, this is a no-brainer. This is kind of what we need to do to be successful, and the technologies that need to be adopted to just help provide better care,
Mhm.
cost efficient. Again, like you don't need a computer that's $1,000 to write a book. You can just do it with a pen and paper, but no one does that anymore because the value, even though you might be shelling out a little bit more for that computer, the value is much greater than the cost of the hardware and the equipment. And so I think that's one of the challenges that I see. Um,
Mhm.
Obviously there's the regulatory hurdles associated with med tech and healthcare in general. You get a little jealous of your counterparts over in the consumer world who are moving extremely fast.
Mhm.
And everyone's always looking at their phones and using that as an example of how things have progressed, yet many folks are still going to work and having to deal with fax machines.
Mhm.
So, we see the future and we can understand how to get there, but just trying to bring the rest of the world along for a ride and to understand the benefits of it is the challenge. I'm not gonna speak to the clinical trials. That's a little bit out of my realm. I'm gonna stick to my kind of R&D focused area here of just creating the best product that we possibly can create for the patients and for the users.
Mhm.
And yeah, I think the adoption of technology now is actually an interesting time with the advent or the rise of AI, machine learning and agentic AI and so forth. Um, I'm curious to see how the regulators of the world and the government
Mhm.
be able to respond to that as we try to bake in all of these cool things into our products, not for the sake of doing it, but to improve outcomes and to progress healthcare.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing, John. Really like the way how you said we can learn from other industries, but at the same time, we'll have to keep in mind the regulatory constraints that our industry has. And it's almost an advantage that we have over some of the B2C companies, because whenever they have tried to venture in healthcare, they could not navigate the regulatory challenges as well as MedTech was able to. So, no, I think lots of insightful commentary there from both of you, which is every innovation journey has its valleys and breakthroughs. And your stories definitely showed the resilience, the collaboration, and a clear patient/clinician-centered vision. So thank you for sharing. So as we saw the journey of the panel, we started with the why and the so what and the how. And now before we open it up to the audience for questions, I just wanted to do a quick lightning round, Ishu and John, on what's the single biggest factor that could accelerate medtech innovation in the next 5 years? Maybe if you can just summarize it in one sentence. Ishu, I'll start with you and then I'll go to John.
I think concordance between the regulatory agencies, the payers, and the guideline writers. I think there's too much disparity between those three of evidentiary hurdles. I think a unification of that. So if you get approval, you get payment, and you get it translates into the guidelines. Because if you are, and I was a practicing cardiologist, and me and my colleagues, you look around, a lot of them don't, they're nose to the grindstone. These are the people you want taking care of your mother. They take care of a ton of patients. They do a great job at it, and they rely on the guidelines. And if the guidelines are such a lagging indicator, lagging behind approvals and things like that, it creates a conundrum for them. So I really do think that unification of those things, to me, be more congruent, will accelerate really everything, and really, bottom line, care for patients.
Yeah, no, that's a very interesting perspective. John?
Yeah, that's a really good way of phrasing that, Isu. It's hard for me to think of anything better, but I'm gonna go out there and say if we can leverage the costs to the technologies that we have to lower the overall costs, to improve where things are deficient now, that's going to be tremendous help. The physicians and caretakers and nurses and everybody in the system from beginning to end is, I think, stretched extremely thin, and they're very stressed. Everyone I talk to doesn't seem to be enjoying the ride at the moment. There's a lot of areas that can be improved, but in addition, to build off of that, if I had to pick a close second, it would be how do we make our technology in our offerings as companies and commercial entities help people do their jobs much better, more easily, more efficiently, and hopefully as cost effective as possible.
Great, very well put, John. Thank you. So that's all we had. I wanted to see if the audience has any questions for the panel. Let's give maybe a minute or so to see if there are any questions coming our way.
And while we're waiting, I want to give John and Smith and Nephew accolades for prioritizing the clinician's well-being as well, because I was an electrophysiologist. I wore lead every day when I did procedures, and the physical toll, not to mention the mental toll and everything else that it takes on you, is not negligible. And in an era where we have the baby boomers are getting older, and we got a lot more people that have healthcare needs. We need good healthcare practitioners, and we need them to stay healthy too. So I think that med tech facilitating ease of healthcare delivery that is beneficial to the patient as well as the clinician, I think it's something that doesn't get talked about a lot, but I think it's really, really important.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Sure.
I'll buy you a drink if I see you at the
the gala. Okay.
The
Excellent. Well, Ishu and John, it was a pleasure moderating this panel. And for the audience, as you saw, this discussion really highlighted the ingenuity and the perseverance behind every innovation represented here. Congratulations again to all our nominees, and thank you to the Galien Foundation for championing innovation that improves the condition. As a reminder, please join us Thursday evening at the American Museum of Natural History for the Prix Galien USA Awards ceremony. And thank you all for being part of the Week of Biomedical Innovation. Thank you.